Before anything else, the same check I run on every one of these. If you were sent here by a video claiming Grok AI was asked how old the pyramids really are and gave some kind of shocking confirmation that they were built 12,500 years ago, that specific claim isn't real. I went looking for the actual conversation these videos supposedly screenshot, and what I found instead was the same recycled template attached to a dozen different channels over the past year, sometimes credited to Grok, sometimes to ChatGPT, sometimes to an unnamed leaked AI model, never with an actual link anyone can click, never with a timestamp, never with a way to verify a single word of it. That's the fabricated part, and it follows a pattern you've probably already noticed if you spend any time in this corner of the internet where a chatbot is presented as suddenly breaking free of its programming to reveal a truth they don't want you to know, when in reality no such exchange exists anywhere outside the video itself. Here's what isn't fabricated, and it's genuinely one of the strangest, most contested, most alive debates running through modern archaeology and geology right now. The question of how old the pyramids actually are and whether everything we've been told about who built them and when is complete has produced real scientific papers, real televised debates between credentialed experts, a real retraction from an academic journal in the last 2 years, and a real, still unresolved discovery sitting inside the Great Pyramid itself that nobody, mainstream or alternative, has fully explained. None of that requires an invented AI moment. It's already sitting in peer-reviewed journals, congressional-style academic hearings on stage at conferences, and a very public argument that spilled onto one of the most listened-to podcasts in the world. Let's start with what mainstream Egyptology actually claims, because most people invoking a hidden truth about the pyramids never. Consensus position, held by essentially the entire community of professional Egyptologists and supported by multiple independent lines of evidence, is that the Great Pyramid of Giza was built during the reign of the pharaoh Khufu, who ruled during Egypt's 4th dynasty from around 2509 to 2483 BCE, putting the pyramid's construction at roughly 4,500 years ago, not 12,500. This isn't just inherited textbook tradition. In the 1980s, and again more rigorously in the 1990s, scientists carried out radiocarbon dating on organic material embedded directly in the pyramid's mortar and structure, things like reed and wood fragments that would have been used and discarded during actual construction. Those samples clustered convincingly around the accepted Old Kingdom timeframe, generally within a few hundred years of the traditional dynastic date, though slightly older than some king lists suggested, a discrepancy researchers attribute to older wood being reused in construction rather than evidence of a vastly older structure. To be specific about that radiocarbon work, since vague, references to science confirming the date don't mean much on their own, a major study published in the journal Nature in 19 years older on average than the traditional king list chronology. Researchers explained the gap by pointing out that ancient Egyptian builders routinely reused old wood, sometimes from long-dead trees or older structures, meaning the wood itself could be centuries older than the moment it was actually built into a wall. A more extensive follow-up study conducted in the mid-1990s refined the sampling and produced dates that clustered even more tightly around the accepted dynastic timeline. And critically, no radiocarbon result from any legitimate peer-reviewed study of the Giza Plateau has ever come back anywhere close to 12,000 years, or even 8,000 years for that matter. Then, in 2013, came a discovery that did more to nail down the who and when than anything found in the previous century. A French-Egyptian archaeological mission led by Pierre Tallet, excavating at Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast, uncovered a cache of papyrus fragments now recognized as the oldest inscribed papyri ever found anywhere on Earth. Among them was the day-by-day logbook of an official named Merer, who supervised a team physically transporting fine white limestone blocks by boat from the Tura, placing a real, named working human being directly inside the pyramid's supply chain during Khufu's own reign. It's about as close to a signed receipt for the Great Pyramid's construction date as archaeology has ever produced for any ancient monument anywhere in the world. So where does a number like 12,500 actually come from, since it clearly isn't manufactured from nothing? This is where the honest version of this story gets genuinely interesting, because it traces back to real researchers, real published theories, and real ongoing arguments between credentialed people, not internet mythology invented from scratch. The first thread runs through a geologist named Robert Schoch, who, in the early 1990s, while teaching at Boston University, examined the weathering patterns on the enclosure walls surrounding the Great Sphinx, and argued publicly that the deep, undulating erosion grooves he observed looked far more consistent with prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall than with thousands of years of dry desert wind and sand. Since Egypt's climate has been arid for most of the dynastic period, Schoch argued that this kind of water-driven erosion would require the Sphinx to have been carved during a much earlier, much wetter climatic period, potentially pushing its origin back to somewhere between 5000 and 7000 BCE, thousands of years before the accepted 4th dynasty date for the Sphinx and the pyramids beside it. Geologists who reviewed Schoch's work directly disputed the conclusion, not the observation of erosion itself, but what caused it. Researchers, including James Harrell, pointed out that the Sphinx enclosure is carved from alternating layers of harder and softer limestone, and that those different layers naturally weather at very different rates even under normal desert conditions, with occasional heavy rain events, dew formation, and wind-driven sand acting together over 4,500 years, rather than requiring a fundamentally different climate era to explain. They also pointed to something Schoch's timeline had trouble accounting for: the Sphinx's own head, which is proportionally much smaller than its body, and widely believed by mainstream Egyptologists to have been recarved from an earlier larger statue during the reign of Khafra, whose own pyramid and causeway sit directly beside it, quarry marks and construction ramps included, tying the entire Sphinx complex back into the same well-documented 4th dynasty building program as everything else on the plateau. Zahi Hawass, the former Egyptian Minister of Antiquities and the most publicly recognizable Egyptologist of the last 3 decades, has repeatedly and forcefully rejected Schoch's dating on exactly these grounds, along with rejecting a long-running rumor, again with no verified documentary basis, of secret chambers hidden beneath the Sphinx's paws. The second thread comes from an Egyptian-born civil engineer named Robert Bauval, who, in 1994, published a theory now known as the Orion correlation, arguing that the layout of the 3 main pyramids at Giza mirrors the pattern of the 3 stars in Orion's belt, and that this stellar alignment matches the sky not as it appeared during Khufu's reign, but as it would have appeared around 10,500 BCE, because of a slow wobble in the Earth's rotational axis called precession that gradually shifts how constellations appear relative to the horizon over thousands of years. Bauval's argument was that the builders encoded a memory of that much earlier sky into the pyramid's ground plan, implying either a far older original design or a far older origin for whatever civilization first conceived it. The mechanism Bauval is relying on, precession, is itself a completely real and well-understood phenomenon in astronomy, not something invented for this theory. The Earth's axis doesn't point in a perfectly fixed direction over long timescales. It slowly traces a wide circle over roughly 26,000 years. The same reason the star, we currently call the North Star Polaris, wasn't the pole star in ancient Egyptian times when a different star, Thuban, held that position instead. Because precession genuinely does change how constellations sit relative to the horizon over thousands of years, an argument built on top of it carries a veneer of real astrophysics, which is part of why it's proven so durable and persuasive to lay audiences, even though the underlying pattern matching it relies on has been repeatedly challenged. Professional astronomers who examined the claim in detail found the fit far less precise than Bauval presented it. Critics pointed out that the correlation depends heavily on which reference points you choose on the ground and in the sky, that using a different but equally defensible set of reference points produces a comfortable match with the conventional 2500 BCE date instead, and that the entire premise rests on selecting one specific arrangement out of many possible groupings of prominent stars. A well-known statistical trap where humans reliably find meaningful-looking patterns in essentially random data if they're motivated to look hard enough. The thread that pulled both of these together into the version of the story most people online have actually encountered is the writer and broadcaster Graham Hancock, whose 1995 book Fingerprints of the Gods, and, more recently, his 2022 Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse, argue that an advanced seafaring global civilization existed before the end of the last ice age and was largely destroyed by a catastrophic event roughly 12,800 to 11,600 years ago, a period geologists call the Younger Dryas, after which survivors of that lost civilization supposedly seeded the beginnings of Egyptian, Mesoamerican, and other ancient cultures, passing down advanced architectural knowledge that eventually produced monuments like the Sphinx and the pyramids. Hancock leans directly on both Schoch's water erosion argument and Bauval's Orion correlation as his 2 central pillars of physical evidence. It's worth being precise about the Younger Dryas itself here because, unlike the pyramid dating claims, it's a genuinely real and seriously debated scientific topic in its own right, just one that exists almost entirely separately from anything about Egypt. Mainstream climatologists agree the Younger Dryas was a real, abrupt return to near glacial cold roughly 12,800 years ago, and a smaller but active group of concentrations of platinum, microscopic diamonds, and melted glass found in sediment layers from that period across multiple continents. Other geologists have published rebuttals questioning whether those same signatures can be produced by ordinary volcanic or terrestrial processes instead. That argument, comet impact or not, is real, ongoing, and completely legitimate as an open scientific question. What isn't supported by any of that research is the additional leap that a technologically advanced global civilization existed at that time, and personally transmitted pyramid building knowledge to Bronze Age Egypt, a claim no impact geologist studying the Younger Dryas has made, and no archaeological dig anywhere in Egypt has ever produced physical evidence for. It's worth pausing here to note that Egypt isn't the only place this exact pattern shows up, because the same basic argument that a familiar ancient monument is secretly thousands or tens of thousands of years older than mainstream archaeology admits gets applied on a fairly regular cycle to other sites around the world. The megalithic complex of Pumapunku in Bolivia, with its unusually precise stone cutting, has drawn similar claims of vastly greater antiquity or non-human construction methods for decades, despite radiocarbon dating from the surrounding Tiwanaku culture placing its construction within the last 2,000 years. A supposed set of pyramids identified in Bosnia in the mid-2000s, promoted heavily by an amateur researcher named Semir Osmanagic, was examined by professional geologists who concluded the hillsides in question were natural geological formations, not human-built structures at all. None of this means every unconventional claim about the ancient world is automatically wrong. Real archaeology has overturned its own assumptions before, and will again, but it does mean the specific rhetorical shape of these stories alone. That gap is exactly what set off one of the more genuinely public academic confrontations of the last few years. When Ancient Apocalypse launched on Netflix in 2022, it drew immediate evidentiary rebuttals that already existed for nearly every specific example the show presented, and who raised a broader concern that framing mainstream archaeologists as part of a secretive establishment actively covering up humanity's real history carries an old and uncomfortable history of its own, since similar ancient advanced civilization narratives have frequently been used, historically, to deny that indigenous and African societies were capable of building their own monumental architecture without outside help. That tension came to a head in November of 2024, when Hancock and Dibble debated the subject directly and at length on the Joe Rogan Experience, a genuinely rare instance of a working field archaeologist and a popular alternative history author arguing the actual underlying evidence point by point in front of an enormous public audience, rather than past each other through book excerpts and documentary narration. And the debate itself, watchable in full today, is a far more substantive and honestly presented version of this disagreement than any fabricated chatbot quote could ever produce. It's genuinely worth noticing here that Göbekli Tepe is frequently cited by figures like Hancock as supporting evidence for a hidden advanced pre-Ice Age civilization, when what it actually demonstrates, according to the archaeologists who excavated and continue to study it, is something almost the opposite and arguably more interesting, that pre-agricultural, non-industrial hunter-gatherer societies were capable of far more organizational sophistication and monumental ambition than 20th century archaeology gave them credit for, without needing to invoke any lost advanced predecessor civilization to explain it. The most recent chapter in this entire story, and the one that shows exactly how quickly these claims can archaeological prospection arguing, based on ground-penetrating radar surveys and radiocarbon dating of soil samples taken from deep within the hill, that Gunung Padang was not a natural volcanic formation at all, but a massive, deliberately constructed pyramid, with the earliest construction phase dating back as far as 27,000 years, a claim that would have made it not just older than the Egyptian pyramids, but older than the previous record holder, Egypt's step pyramid of Djoser, by more than 20,000 years, and older than virtually anything else humans are known to have built anywhere on Earth. The paper spread fast, exactly the kind of headline built for viral video content, and the scientific criticism arrived almost as fast. Archaeologist Flint Dibble was among the most vocal public critics, explaining that dating soil samples pulled from deep underground tells you how old the soil is, not how old any structure sitting near or above it is, unless there's direct, verifiable evidence that humans deliberately placed or shaped that material. Evidence the paper's own data didn't actually establish. He offered a memorable comparison that, using this same logic, you could drill a core sample beneath the British Parliament building, date the soil 40,000 years down, and claim Parliament itself is 40,000 years old. Geophysicists and archaeologists with direct expertise in radiocarbon methodology raised the same fundamental objection through more formal channels, and in March of 2024, Archaeological Prospection's editors, together with the publisher, formally retracted the paper entirely, stating explicitly that the radiocarbon dating had been applied to soil samples with no association to any artifacts or features that could be reliably interpreted as human-made, and concluding that the paper's central claim of an ancient constructed pyramid was therefore incorrect. Every one of the paper's original authors publicly disagreed with the retraction and stood by their original interpretation. And Gunung Padang's true age and origin remains alive, unresolved, and now considerably more cautious subject of study, But the episode stands as one of the clearest recent examples of how a genuinely extraordinary claim, published through a real academic journal with real credentialed authors, can still fail rigorous outside review within months. There's one more piece of this story that deserves real attention specifically because it's the closest thing that exists to an actual, ongoing, unresolved mystery physically inside one of the Giza pyramids. And it involves no chatbot, no ancient astronaut, and no lost civilization, only particle physics. In 2015, an international team of scientists and engineers launched a project called Scan Pyramids, using a completely non-invasive imaging technique called muon radiography, which detects subatomic particles called muons that constantly rain down from cosmic rays and pass through solid stone at different rates, depending on the density of material they travel through, essentially letting researchers see inside a massive structure without drilling a single hole. In November of 2017, the Scan Pyramids team announced in a paper published in the journal Nature and independently confirmed, using 3 separate detection methods across 2 different scientific institutions, the discovery of a previously unknown void above the Great Pyramids Grand Gallery, at least 30 meters long, a chamber-sized space that nobody had detected in over a century and a half of prior exploration, and named it the Scan Pyramids Big Void. Then, in March of 2023, the same team published further, more precise muon measurements in Nature Communications, identifying a second, smaller void, roughly 9 meters long behind a distinctive chevron-shaped stone feature on the pyramid's north face, now called the North Face Corridor. To be clear about how solid this finding actually is, this wasn't a single ambiguous scan open to interpretation. The big void was detected independently by 3 completely different muon detection technologies run by 3 separate research groups: nuclear emulsion films from a team at Nagoya University, scintillator-based detectors from the Japanese research organization KEK, and gas detectors from France's Atomic Energy Commission, and all 3 converged on the same result with a statistical confidence level, comparable to the threshold physicists required before officially confirming the discovery of the Higgs boson. That's an unusually rigorous standard of evidence for archaeology, and it's exactly why the discovery was published in Nature rather than dismissed as a curiosity. As of the most recent published research, nobody, not the Scan Pyramids team, not the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities, not any independent archaeologist, knows what either void was actually built for. There's no confirmed evidence of treasure, no confirmed evidence of a hidden burial chamber, and no confirmed evidence of anything extraordinary or extraterrestrial about them either. Only a genuinely unexplained architectural feature detected using cutting-edge particle physics inside a 4,500-year-old building, with researchers now developing small robotic probes to physically explore the corridor without disturbing the structure itself. That is a real, current, actively investigated mystery, sitting inside the single most famous ancient monument on Earth, and it required 0 invented chatbot dialogue to be worth talking about. Stepping back across this entire debate, from Schoch's water erosion argument on the Sphinx in the 1990s, through Bovell's Orion correlation, through Hancock's Younger Dryas civilization theory and its very public collision with mainstream archaeology, through Gunung Padang's rise and retraction, to the genuinely unresolved void sitting inside the Great Pyramid right now, a consistent and far more interesting pattern emerges than either the pyramids are exactly what we were always told and nothing more, or everything you know is a lie. Some individual claims turn out, on close inspection, to rest on selective interpretation of ambiguous geological evidence, like the Sphinx's erosion patterns. Some rest on statistically flexible pattern matching that looks compelling until you test alternative reference points, like the Orion correlation. Some made it through initial peer review, only to collapse once independent experts checked the underlying methodology, like Gunung Padang. And a genuinely small number of findings, like Göbekli Tepe's true and verified age, or the still unexplained voids inside the Great Pyramid, represent real, hard, independently confirmed evidence that the true history of ancient human ingenuity is stranger, older, and less fully mapped than most people assume, without needing a single fabricated detail to make that case. So, to directly answer whether the pyramids were really built 12,500 years ago, and some AI model finally confirmed it. No credible dating method, no peer-reviewed archaeological study, and no verifiable AI conversation has ever established that. The overwhelming physical evidence, radiocarbon-dated organic material, a worker's own written logbook naming the pyramid under construction, and consistent corroborating archaeological context across the entire Giza Plateau, places the Great Pyramid's construction firmly within Khufu's 4th dynasty reign, roughly 4,500 years ago. At the same time, it is entirely true that real, credentialed scientists have spent 3 decades seriously arguing over the Sphinx's true age, that a legitimate and still unresolved scientific debate exists over what triggered the abrupt Younger Dryas cooling event nearly 13,000 years ago. That an academic paper claiming a 27,000-year-old pyramid in Indonesia was published, went viral, and was formally retracted within 5 months, and that particle physicists using cosmic ray muons have discovered real, unexplained empty spaces inside the Great Pyramid that remain a genuine, actively studied mystery to this day. That's the actual, sourced, considerably stranger story sitting underneath this topic, playing out through real radiocarbon labs, a real ancient logbook found on the shore of the Red Sea, a real journal retraction, and real physicists pointing cosmic ray detectors at a 4,500-year-old building because nobody can yet explain what's hiding inside it. No invented chatbot required, and honestly, no invented chatbot could improve on it.